"You don't belong here, boy," the judge demanded, until he learned who the black man's mother was. The moment Marcus Thompson settled into first-class seat 2A, adjusting his worn MIT hoodie and pulling out his laptop, he could feel the eyes on him. 28 years of success, 3 companies sold a portfolio worth more than most small nations' GDP, and still in moments like these, he was reduced to what people saw, a black man in casual clothes who in their minds didn't belong. What the other first-class passengers couldn't possibly know, as they exchanged those knowing glances, those subtle shifts away from him, was that Marcus hadn't just purchased a ticket for this flight. He owned the entire airline, every plane in its fleet, and the careers of every employee who would in the next 3 hours reveal exactly why he'd orchestrated this elaborate test. But the real shock wouldn't be his identity. It would be the appearance of his 70-year-old mother, Grace Thompson, still wearing her janitor uniform, whose presence would unlock a 20-year-old secret that would destroy a retired judge's reputation and transform an entire industry's culture forever. Marcus Thompson had been planning this moment for 6 months, ever since the complaints had started appearing on his desk. As the majority shareholder of Transglobal Airlines Holdings, though few knew it as his ownership was spread across 17 shell companies and private equity firms, he'd watched the discrimination reports pile up with increasing alarm. Black passengers questioned aggressively in first class. Latino families asked to prove their tickets were legitimate. Asian business people told they were probably in the wrong cabin. The reports were buried in bureaucracy, dismissed as misunderstandings or isolated incidents by his management team. His chief operations officer, William Brennan, had assured him repeatedly that Transglobal had the most comprehensive diversity training in the industry. His HR director, Patricia Morse, had shown him glossy presentations about their commitment to inclusion. But Marcus knew better than to trust presentations. His mother had taught him that. Grace Thompson had cleaned airplanes for Transglobal Airlines for 30 years. Every night she'd come home to their small apartment in Chicago's South Side, her uniform smelling of industrial disinfectant, her hands raw from chemicals, and tell young Marcus stories about the planes she'd cleaned. She'd describe first class like it was a magical kingdom, soft leather seats, real glasses instead of plastic warm nuts served in ceramic bowls. One day, baby, she'd tell him, tucking him into bed, "You're gonna sit in those seats, not clean them, sit in them." She'd been half right. Marcus did sit in first class, now he owned it. The MIT hoodie he wore this morning was deliberate, a 25-year-old relic from his undergraduate days when he'd been one of 12 black students in his computer science program. The jeans were intentionally casual, bought from Target, not the designer brands that usually hung in his closet. His shoes, beat-up New Balance sneakers, completed the image he wanted to project, successful enough to buy a first-class ticket, but not their kind of successful. He'd boarded Flight 447 from Chicago to Los Angeles at 8:15 a.m. using a ticket purchased under his real name, but through a third-party booking site that wouldn't flag him in Transglobal's system as anyone special. His assistant Jennifer had wanted to warn the crew to prevent any incidents. Marcus had forbidden it. The whole point, he'd explained, is to see how they treat someone they don't think matters. Emily Chen, the gate agent, had been the first test. She was 26 according to her personnel file, hired 2 years ago with sterling recommendations from Delta. When Marcus had handed her his boarding pass, her smile had flickered just for a second. She'd scanned it twice and typed something into her computer. "Mr. Thompson," she'd said, pronouncing his name like it might be fake, "this ticket is for first class." "Yes," Marcus had replied simply. "I'll need to verify this with my supervisor." "Is there a problem with the ticket?" Emily had hesitated, clearly trying to find the right words. "It's just unusual. The system sometimes has errors." "But does my ticket show an error?" She'd looked at her screen again, found nothing wrong, and reluctantly handed back his boarding pass. "Enjoy your flight, sir." The "sir" had come out strained, like she was forcing it. Walking down the jet bridge, Marcus had activated the recording app on his phone. Not to create a viral moment, he had no intention of posting anything online but for documentation. If he was going to confront his board about systemic discrimination, he needed proof. The first-class cabin of Transglobal's Boeing 787 was Marcus's personal pride. He'd overseen the redesign himself, choosing the Italian leather seats, the Japanese-designed lighting system, the French crystal glassware. Every detail had been carefully selected to compete with Emirates and Singapore Airlines. It was luxury incarnate, the kind of space where million-dollar deals were discussed in hushed tones and celebrated with champagne that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Janet Williams, the head purser, stood at the entrance to first class. She was 43, a 20-year veteran of the airline with the kind of practiced smile that could warm or freeze depending on her assessment of a passenger's worth. When she saw Marcus, the smile froze. "Good morning," she said, her eyes taking in his hoodie, his jeans, his general appearance. "May I see your boarding pass?" Marcus handed it over, watching her expression carefully. She studied it longer than necessary, as if hoping the seat assignment might change if she stared hard enough. "2A," she finally said. "That's right this way." She led him to his seat, one of the best on the plane, a window seat in the front row of first class with extra legroom and direct aisle access. Marcus settled in, pulling out his laptop, a deliberately modest ThinkPad instead of the cutting-edge MacBook Pro he usually used. The first-class cabin began filling with its usual clientele. A venture capitalist Marcus recognized from TechCrunch took seat 1A already on his third call of the morning. A pharmaceutical executive and her husband settled into 3A and 3B, discussing their vacation plans for Maui. An older couple, probably in their 70s, took seats 4A and 4B, holding hands and smiling at everyone. And then at 8:32 a.m., Richard Hawthorne boarded. Marcus recognized him immediately, though it had been 20 years since he'd last seen him in person. The retired judge moved through the cabin with the bearing of someone accustomed to power, someone who'd spent decades having people rise when he entered a room. At 62, Hawthorne still cut an imposing figure, 6'2", silver-haired, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Hawthorne stopped at row 2, looked at his boarding pass, then at Marcus, then at his boarding pass again. His expression shifted from confusion to indignation. "There's been a mistake," he announced, not to Marcus but to Janet, who hurried over. "How can I help you, Judge Hawthorne?" Janet's entire demeanor changed when she recognized him. Her spine straightened, her smile brightened. Her voice warmed by several degrees. "This man is in my seat." Marcus looked up from his laptop, keeping his expression neutral. "I believe you're mistaken. This is seat 2A, and I have the boarding pass right here." Hawthorne didn't even acknowledge him. He spoke to Janet as if Marcus were invisible. "I specifically requested 2A. I always sit in 2A on this flight. There's obviously been some sort of system error." Janet looked at Marcus, then at Hawthorne, and made a calculation that would cost her everything. "Mr. Thompson, would you mind if we verified your booking? Sometimes our system does have glitches." "I would mind, actually," Marcus said calmly. "My boarding pass is valid. I was here first. Unless there's a specific reason you are questioning my right to this seat." Hawthorne finally looked directly at him, and Marcus saw the exact moment of recognition, not of who Marcus was, but of what he represented in Hawthorne's worldview. "Young man," Hawthorne said, his voice carrying the authority of decades on the bench, "I don't know how you acquired this ticket." "I purchased it," Marcus interrupted. "But surely you can understand that there are certain protocols, certain expectations in first class. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable in economy." The cabin had gone quiet. Everyone was watching now, though some pretended to be absorbed in their phones or magazines. Dr. Sarah Kim, a Korean-American surgeon sitting in 3C, spoke up. "Excuse me, but the gentleman was seated first. He has a valid ticket. What exactly is the problem?" Hawthorne turned to her with a patronizing smile. "With all due respect, doctor, this doesn't concern you." "Discrimination concerns everyone," Dr. Kim replied firmly. Janet intervened quickly, trying to diffuse the situation. "I'm sure we can resolve this amicably. Mr. Thompson, would you perhaps consider taking seat 2B? It's also a premium seat, and we could offer you compensation for the inconvenience." "The middle seat?" Marcus asked. "You want me to give up my assigned window seat for a middle seat because this gentleman demands it?" "It would be the courteous thing to do," Hawthorne said. "Some of us have actual business to conduct on this flight, important business." "And you assume I don't?" Hawthorne laughed, the sound sharp and dismissive. "In that outfit, please. You probably saved for months to afford this ticket, trying to live out some fantasy. Well, I hate to break it to you, but first class isn't just about buying a ticket, it's about belonging." Marcus felt his phone vibrate. A text from his daughter Zara, who was seated in economy. "Dad, is everything okay up there? People are saying there's some kind of argument." He typed back, "Everything's fine, sweetheart. Educational moment in progress." "Your MIT hoodie thing." Something like that. Janet had pulled out her tablet, pretending to check something in the system. "Mr. Thompson, I'm showing here that there might be an issue with your booking. Can you provide your confirmation number? Marcus recited it from memory. Janet typed it in and her face showed confusion. The booking was not only valid but had been made 6 months ago, paid in full with a corporate credit card. But she looked at Hawthorne's expensive suit, his obvious wealth and authority, and doubled down on her mistake. Sometimes these bookings can be manipulated, she said carefully. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step into the aisle while we sort this out. No, Marcus said simply. Excuse me. I said no, I'm not moving from my assigned seat without a valid reason. And this gentleman wants my seat is not a valid reason. Hawthorne's face reddened. Do you know who I am? Marcus almost smiled. If only he knew how loaded that question was. Should I? I'm Judge Richard Hawthorne. I served on the Illinois Supreme Court for 15 years. I've been flying with this airline since before you were born. I know the CEO personally. One phone call from me, and you'll be on the no-fly list before we land. The pharmaceutical executive in 3A was recording now, her phone held discreetly, but obviously capturing everything. The elderly couple in 4A and 4B looked deeply uncomfortable. The venture capitalist in 1A had stopped his calls and was watching with undisguised interest. A younger passenger, Tyler Brooks, a 22-year-old influencer with a following for social justice content, had started live streaming from seat 5C. Y'all seeing this? He whispered to his phone. Retired judge trying to kick a black man out of first class on Transglobal Airlines. This is happening right now. Janet made another decision that would haunt her. Mr. Thompson, I'm going to have to insist. Please gather your belongings and come with me. We can discuss compensation at the gate. I'm not moving. Then I'll have to call security. Please do. I'd like an official record of this. Janet pulled out her radio. This is Flight 447 requesting security assistance at Gate B23. We have a passenger refusing crew member instructions. The cabin erupted in whispers. More phones appeared. Tyler's live stream viewer count jumped from 500 to 5,000 in 30 seconds. Dr. Kim stood up and stood up. This is outrageous. You're calling security because a black man won't give up his seat to a white man. What year is this? Ma'am, please sit down, Janet said. This is a matter of following crew instructions. Your instructions are discriminatory. They're based on maintaining order. They're based on racism, an unexpected voice said. It was the elderly man in 4B, his voice shaking with anger. I'm 81 years old. I lived through the civil rights movement. I thought we were past this, but here we are watching it happen all over again. Hawthorne turned on him. Sir, with all due respect, you don't understand the situation. I understand perfectly. You think you're entitled to that seat because you're white and wealthy, and you think he doesn't deserve it because he's black and wearing casual clothes. How dare you? How dare you? The elderly man shot back. My grandson is black. Would you try to take his seat too? As the argument escalated, Marcus sent a text to his security chief, James Rodriguez, who was stationed at the gate as planned. Phase 1 complete, discrimination documented. Prepare for Phase 2. Rodriguez replied, copy. Your mother just arrived. Marcus's heart rate increased slightly. This was the part of the plan he hadn't told anyone about, not even his assistant. Grace Thompson wasn't supposed to just board the plane. She was about to deliver a performance that would shatter Richard Hawthorne's world. 2 security officers appeared in the doorway. Officers Martinez and Jackson, both of whom Marcus had personally selected for this flight because of their reputations for fairness and professionalism. They approached the situation carefully. What seems to be the problem? Officer Martinez asked. Janet spoke first, her version of events carefully crafted. This passenger is refusing to comply with crew instructions. He's in a disputed seat and won't move to allow us to resolve the situation. Martinez looked at Marcus. Sir, may I see your boarding pass? Marcus handed it over. Martinez scanned it with his device. It beeped green valid. The boarding pass is legitimate, Martinez announced. Sir, has anyone given you a valid reason why you should move from your assigned seat? No, just that Judge Hawthorne wants it and apparently deserves it more than I do. Martinez turned to Hawthorne. Sir, what's your seat assignment? Hawthorne pulled out his boarding pass with obvious irritation. 2B, but I always sit in 2A, always. This is completely unacceptable. Your assigned seat is 2B. Yes, but then that's your seat, sir. This gentleman has 2A. There's no dispute here. Hawthorne's face turned an alarming shade of red. Do you know who I am? Yes, sir, you identified yourself as Judge Hawthorne. But that doesn't change the seat assignments. I want to speak to your supervisor. I am the supervisor for this shift, Martinez replied calmly, and the seat assignments stand. Tyler's live stream had hit 20,000 viewers. Comments were flying, judge getting schooled. This is America in 2025. Sue them all. Add Transglobal Air, your employees are trash. Janet, realizing the situation was spiraling out of control, tried one more tactic. Perhaps we could upgrade someone to first class from economy, and Mr. Thompson could take that seat as a gesture of goodwill. You want to move me to economy to make room for him in first class? Marcus asked, making sure everyone heard the absurdity of it. Not move you, relocate you to a comparable. There's nothing comparable to the seat I paid for and am sitting in, Marcus interrupted. Unless you can give me a policy-based reason why I should move, I'm staying here. Captain Patricia Anderson emerged from the cockpit. She was 55, a former Navy pilot with 30 years of commercial experience, and she commanded instant respect. She took in the scene, the security officers, the recording phones, the angry passengers, the divided cabin. Can someone explain why we're delayed? Her voice was calm but carried absolute authority. Hawthorne launched into his version, emphasizing his status, his history with the airline, his importance. Janet supported his narrative, carefully avoiding any mention of race, but focusing on customer service priorities and maintaining premium passenger satisfaction. Captain Anderson listened, then turned to Marcus. Sir, your perspective. Marcus spoke for exactly 30 seconds, laying out the facts with surgical precision. Seated first, valid boarding pass, asked to move based solely on another passenger's demand and apparent assumptions about his worth based on his appearance. Anderson looked at her crew, then at Hawthorne, then at Marcus. The boarding pass is valid. Yes, but, Janet started. No buts. Mr. Thompson keeps his seat. Judge Hawthorne, you can take your assigned seat in 2B or wait for the next flight. Those are your options. Hawthorne's composure finally cracked. This is absolutely unconscionable. I've been a loyal customer of this airline for 30 years. This person probably used miles or got some error fare. He doesn't belong here. Based on what evidence? Captain Anderson asked coolly. Based on obvious facts. Look at him. That hoodie probably hasn't been washed in weeks. Those shoes are falling apart. He's probably some tech worker who got lucky with stock options trying to play in a league he doesn't understand. The cabin gasped collectively. Even those who might have privately agreed with Hawthorne were shocked by his open hostility. It was at that moment that Grace Thompson boarded the plane. She moved slowly, her 70-year-old frame showing the wear of decades of physical labor. She was wearing her Transglobal janitor uniform, the same navy blue jumpsuit she'd worn for 30 years, with her name embroidered on the pocket and her employee ID clipped to her chest. Her gray hair was pulled back in the same practical bun she'd worn every night shift. Her hands, weathered and strong, carried a small worn purse. She walked through first class toward economy, her eyes scanning the seats as if checking for trash to collect a habit so ingrained it was unconscious. As she passed row 2, her eyes met Marcus's for just a moment. The slightest nod passed between them. Hawthorne saw her, and his expression changed to one of recognition mixed with disgust. You're that cleaning woman. What are you doing on this flight? Grace stopped, turned slowly, and looked at the man who had destroyed her family 20 years ago. Her voice when she spoke was steady and dignified. I'm a passenger, sir, just like you. Passengers don't wear janitor uniforms. Hawthorne scoffed. Did you steal a ticket too? The word too hung in the air, its implication crystal clear. Grace smiled, the kind of smile that held decades of pain transformed into strength. I didn't steal anything, Judge Hawthorne. Unlike some people in this cabin, everything I have, I earned honestly. What's that supposed to mean? Grace looked him directly in the eyes. You don't remember me, do you, 20 years ago? Chicago courthouse. You presided over my husband's trial. Hawthorne's face went pale. A memory was surfacing, something he'd buried, something he'd never expected to confront at 30,000 feet. Marcus watched his phone, recording everything as the man who had wrongfully convicted his father for a crime he didn't commit finally recognized the woman whose life he'd destroyed. David Thompson. Grace continued, her voice carrying through the silent cabin. You sentenced him to 15 years for a robbery he didn't commit. Even after evidence proved his innocence, you refused to reconsider. He died in prison, Judge Hawthorne. Died for a crime he didn't commit because you needed your conviction rate to stay perfect for your Supreme Court appointment. The cabin was absolutely silent. Even the engine noise seemed to fade. Tyler's live stream had hit 50,000 viewers and climbing. Comments were exploding. What? Plot twist of the century. This can't be real. Hawthorne's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. His carefully constructed world of privilege and respect was crumbling in real time. Dr. Kim spoke into the silence. Is this true? Did you wrongfully convict this woman's husband? That case was, it was complicated. The evidence at the time, Hawthorne stammered. The evidence that you suppressed, Grace asked. The witness testimony you didn't allow the video footage that mysteriously disappeared from evidence. Marcus stood up, then unable to stay seated any longer. Mom, he said quietly, but his voice carried. Every head in the cabin swiveled between Grace and Marcus. The resemblance was undeniable once you looked for it, the same strong jaw, the same determined eyes, the same dignity in the face of injustice. That's your mother, Janet whispered, her face draining of color. The cleaning lady's son, Hawthorne said, his voice hollow. You're the cleaning lady's son. I'm David Thompson's son, Marcus corrected. The man you murdered with your ambition. Tyler's camera was shaking, his whispered commentary barely coherent. Oh my God, this is insane. The judge who wanted the seat wrongfully convicted his father. I can't even. Grace Thompson moved through the first-class cabin with the same quiet dignity she'd carried for 7 decades. Every eye followed her, this woman in a janitor's uniform who had just shattered the careful social hierarchy of the premium cabin with a few simple sentences. She stopped at row 2, looking down at Richard Hawthorne, who seemed to have aged 10 years in the last 30 seconds. 20 years, she said softly. 20 years I've cleaned these planes hoping one day I'd see you again. Not for revenge, Judge Hawthorne, for truth. Marcus remained standing, his hand reaching out to touch his mother's shoulder. The gesture was protective, but also supportive, as if drawing strength from her presence. The MIT hoodie suddenly made sense to everyone watching. This wasn't about dressing down. It was about honoring where he came from while showing where he'd gone. This is ridiculous, Hawthorne managed, trying to recover his composure. Whatever happened 20 years ago has nothing to do with this flight. You're creating a disturbance. Captain, I demand these people be removed. Captain Anderson's expression was unreadable. Judge Hawthorne, from what I'm hearing, you're the one who created the disturbance by demanding another passenger's seat. Now we're learning there's significant history between you. I think everyone would benefit from hearing the full story. I'm not obligated to. You're not obligated to do anything, Anderson agreed. But given that you very publicly questioned Mr. Thompson's right to be here, perhaps you should explain why you feel entitled to question anyone's rightful place. Janet Williams, the head purser, was frantically texting someone, probably corporate management, alerting them to the unfolding disaster. Her phone rang almost immediately. She answered in a whisper, her face growing paler with each word she heard. Meanwhile, Tyler's live stream had exploded to 100,000 viewers. News outlets were picking it up. A trans-global scandal was trending. Someone had already created a Wikipedia page for Flight 447 incident. Dr. Kim stood up, her voice professional but angry. I want to hear this story. As someone who's faced discrimination in these very seats, I want to know what kind of man is so comfortable demanding others give up their rightful place. The elderly couple in 4A and 4B nodded agreement. We're not taking off until we hear this, the woman said firmly. I've had enough of watching injustice happen in silence. Grace looked at her son, a question in her eyes. Marcus nodded. They had planned for various scenarios, but this organic uprising of passenger support hadn't been one of them. May I sit? Grace asked Captain Anderson. My legs aren't what they used to be. Take my seat, Dr. Kim offered, immediately standing up from 3C. Grace settled into the first-class seat, the first time in 30 years of cleaning them that she'd actually sat in one. The leather embraced her tired body, and for a moment her composure cracked. A single tear rolled down her weathered cheek. My husband David was a good man, she began, her voice steady despite the tear. Worked construction, coached Little League, never had so much as a parking ticket. On March 15, 2005, a convenience store 5 blocks from our home was robbed. The owner, Mr. Park, was shot but survived. The only description was tall black male, approximately 40 years old. She paused, looking directly at Hawthorne. David was at home with me that night. We were celebrating Marcus's acceptance to MIT. We had 12 people at our house who could verify David never left. But you didn't want to hear from them, did you, Judge? Hawthorne's attorney instincts kicked in. The witness was 73 years old with cataracts, Grace interrupted. He said he wasn't sure. You pressured him. We have the court transcripts where he tried to recant, said he couldn't be certain, but you wouldn't let him. Marcus pulled out his phone, opening a document. I have those transcripts here. Would anyone like to see them? Page 247. The witness states, I want to be clear. I cannot be certain it was the defendant. Page 248, Judge Hawthorne responds, the jury will disregard that statement as the witness has already made a positive identification. Gasps rippled through the cabin. The venture capitalist in 1A was typing furiously on his laptop, probably researching the case. The pharmaceutical executive was openly crying. But that's not even the worst part, Grace continued. 3 weeks into the trial, a security video surfaced from the ATM across the street. It showed the real robber, clearly a man named Michael Curtis, who was arrested 2 months later for another robbery and confessed to the park shooting. But that video never made it into evidence, did it, Judge? Hawthorne's face had gone from pale to gray. That video was deemed inadmissible due to chain of custody issues. Chain of custody issues that you created, Marcus said, his calm finally breaking. The video was logged into evidence at 9:47 a.m. You signed the rejection order at 9:52 a.m. 5 minutes to review crucial evidence that would have freed an innocent man. Tyler's camera was capturing everything. His commentary had stopped. He was just letting the drama unfold. Comments were scrolling so fast they were unreadable, but the viewer count showed 200,000 and climbing. Janet's phone rang again. She listened, then approached Captain Anderson. Captain Corporate wants us to deplane everyone, and we're not deplaning anyone, Anderson said firmly. This needs to play out. But the liability exists because discrimination occurred on our watch. Hiding it now only makes it worse. A new voice entered the conversation. Zara Thompson, Marcus's 16-year-old daughter, had walked up from economy. She was tall like her father, with her grandmother's strong features and her late mother's fierce intelligence. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd been raised to know her worth. Dad, she said, then saw Grace. Grandma, what's going on? Marcus put his arm around his daughter. Remember the stories about your grandfather? The one who died in a prison for a crime he didn't commit? Zara looked at Hawthorne with sudden understanding. This is him. This is the judge. Young lady, you don't understand, Hawthorne started. I understand perfectly. Zara cut him off with the fearlessness of youth. You destroyed my family before I was even born. My grandmother had to raise my father alone while cleaning airplanes at night. My father had to watch his dad die behind bars for something he didn't do. And you became a Supreme Court justice. She pulled out her own phone, scrolling to something. I did a school project on wrongful convictions last year. The David Thompson case is literally taught in law schools now as an example of judicial misconduct. There are 3 books written about it. The Innocence Project calls it one of the worst miscarriages of justice in Illinois history. The cabin was riveted. This wasn't just about a seat anymore. This was about justice delayed, but perhaps not denied. Officer Martinez, who had remained silent throughout, finally spoke. Judge Hawthorne, given what I'm hearing, I need to ask, are you aware that there's an active review of your cases by the Illinois Bar Association? Hawthorne's head snapped up. What? That's impossible. I would have been notified. The notification was sent last week, Marcus said quietly. I know because I'm the one who filed the complaint, along with the families of 17 other people you wrongfully convicted during your tenure. The reveal landed like a bomb. Janet actually staggered, grabbing a seat back for support. The implications were staggering. This wasn't random. This was planned. You set this up, Hawthorne whispered. This whole thing, you knew I'd be on this flight. I knew you flew this route every month to visit your daughter in Los Angeles, Marcus confirmed. I knew you always insisted on seat 2A because you believe it has the best angle for working on your laptop. I knew that when you saw a black man in casual clothes in your seat, you'd react exactly as you did. What I didn't know was whether the crew would enable your discrimination. Sadly, they did. He turned to Janet. Ms. Williams, in the last 6 months, how many passengers of color have you relocated from first class to economy? Janet's mouth opened and closed. I treat all passengers equally. Do you? Because I have the data. 17 black passengers, 11 Latino passengers, 8 Asian passengers, all relocated for various reasons, system errors, booking mistakes, customer service priorities. Meanwhile, 0 white passengers were relocated. 0. The pharmaceutical executive in 3A gasped. I was relocated last year. They said there was a booking error, but I'd paid full price for first class. They gave me a voucher, but... Let me guess, Marcus said. A white passenger needed your seat for some urgent reason. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. They made me feel like I'd done something wrong by questioning it. Tyler's live stream exploded with similar stories. Comments poured in from viewers sharing their own experiences. The narrative was shifting from one incident to a pattern of systemic discrimination. James Rodriguez, Marcus's security chief, entered the cabin. He'd been watching from the gate, waiting for his cue. His appearance, 6'4", former Marine, currently head of security for Trans Global Holdings, changed the energy in the cabin immediately. Mr. Mitchell, he said formally, using Marcus's full name for the first time. The transportation secretary is on the line. She wants to know if you're ready to proceed with the federal investigation. The cabin went completely silent. Mitchell. Not Thompson. Mitchell. Janet's phone slipping from her numb fingers. You're Marcus Mitchell, the Marcus Mitchell. Our CEO is David Mitchell. You can't be... David Mitchell is my business name, Marcus explained. I legally changed it after my father died to honor him and to distance myself from the pain. But I was born Marcus Thompson, son of David and Grace Thompson. And yes, I own 61% of Trans Global Airlines through various holding companies. The revelation rippled through the cabin like a shockwave. The venture capitalist in 1A actually laughed a short, shocked burst of disbelief. You're telling me that Judge Hawthorne just tried to take a seat from the man who owns the entire airline? More importantly, Marcus continued, he discriminated against me when he thought I was just another black passenger. And the crew supported him. That tells you everything about the culture of this airline, my airline, that needs to change. Captain Anderson stepped forward. Mr. Mitchell, as pilot in command, I need to file an official report. What happened on my aircraft was unacceptable. But I have to ask, why didn't you identify yourself immediately? Because nothing would have changed, Marcus replied. Janet and Emily would have apologized to me not for their discrimination, but for discriminating against someone powerful. They would have been more careful around wealthy black passengers, not all black passengers. The systemic issues would have continued, just more carefully hidden. He looked around the cabin at the faces watching him, some ashamed, some angry, some inspired. Real change doesn't come from protecting the powerful. It comes from protecting the powerless. Grace stood up from Dr. Kim's seat, moving to stand beside her son. Judge Hawthorne, you took my husband from me. You took Marcus's father from him. You took years we can never get back. But today my son is showing you something David would have been proud of. That dignity isn't determined by what you wear or where you sit, but by how you treat others when you think nobody's watching. Hawthorne, who had been silent during the revelations, finally spoke. So what now? You'll have me arrested, disbarred. Is this your revenge? This isn't revenge, Marcus said. It's accountability, and it's just beginning. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. The call connected immediately, and he put it on speaker. Mr. Mitchell, an official voice said. This is Secretary Martinez. I understand you have evidence of systemic discrimination within Trans Global Airlines. I do, Madam Secretary. We have video evidence, documentation, and multiple witnesses. I'm requesting immediate federal oversight of all U.S. airlines' anti-discrimination policies. Granted, we'll have investigators at every major hub within 6 hours. What else do you need? Marcus looked at Janet, at Hawthorne, at the crew members who had gathered to watch. I need to implement immediate changes at TransGlobal. Every employee involved in discriminatory behavior today will be terminated. New policies will be implemented within 24 hours. And we'll be establishing the Grace Thompson Foundation for Equity in Travel, funded with $100 million to provide legal support for discrimination victims. The secretary's voice was warm. Your mother must be proud, Mr. Mitchell. Grace took the phone. Madam Secretary, I'm not proud because my son is rich or powerful. I'm proud because he remembered where he came from and used his blessings to lift others. That's what his father would have wanted. After the call ended, the cabin erupted in discussion. Tyler's live stream had hit 500,000 viewers. News vans were arriving at the airport. The story was going global. But in seat 2B, the middle seat, Hawthorne had refused to take. Something unexpected was happening. The retired judge was crying, not the tears of self-pity or anger, but something deeper. David Thompson, he said, his voice broken. I remember him now. He sat in my courtroom with such dignity even as I was destroying his life. He looked at me with pity, not hatred. He said something I'll never forget. Judge, I forgive you because holding on to hate would make me guilty of something worse than what you're accusing me of. Marcus felt his own composure crack for the first time. Those words he'd never known his father had said that. Hawthorne continued, I knew he was innocent. The evidence was too convenient, too clean. But I needed that conviction. The Supreme Court Appointment Committee was watching. One more high-profile conviction, and I'd get the nomination. He looked up at Grace. I destroyed your family for a job I held for 15 years. 15 years of making decisions about justice when I had perverted it for my own gain. The confession hung in the air. Tyler's camera captured every word. The cabin was silent except for the hum of engines. Then something extraordinary happened. Richard Hawthorne Jr., the judge's 35-year-old son, appeared on Tyler's live stream. He was watching from his law office in Los Angeles, and he asked to be patched through to the plane's communication system. Captain Anderson, recognizing the historic nature of what was happening, approved it. Dad, Richard Jr.'s voice came through the speakers. I'm watching this. The whole world is watching this. Hawthorne Sr. closed his eyes. Son, No, Dad. Listen, I became a public defender because of you. Not to follow in your footsteps, but to undo the damage you did. I've spent 10 years defending people like David Thompson. People you would have convicted without a second thought. The pain in the younger Hawthorne's voice was evident. I'm ashamed of you, Dad, but I'm also grateful to Mr. Mitchell and Mrs. Thompson for showing the world what you really are. Maybe now you can begin to understand the harm you've caused. Richard, please. I've contacted the Innocence Project. We're going to review every case you ever presided over. Every single one, and Dad, I'll be leading the team. The live stream showed Richard Jr. in his office surrounded by law books and case files. Behind him, several other lawyers were visible, all working on computers, all pulling up case records. Mr. Mitchell, Richard Jr. continued, I want to personally apologize for what my father did to your family. If you'll allow me, I'd like to work with your foundation, pro bono, for as long as it takes to make this right. Marcus looked at Grace, who nodded slowly. We accept your offer, Mr. Hawthorne. Your father took something from us that can never be returned, but perhaps you can help ensure it doesn't happen to others. The cabin was emotional. Even Janet, who faced termination, was crying. The weight of systemic injustice suddenly made visible was overwhelming. Dr. Kim stood up. Mr. Mitchell, I'm a surgeon, but I'm also on the board of the American Medical Association. We've been documenting discrimination in medical settings for years. Would TransGlobal be willing to partner with us to create comprehensive bias training that actually works? Yes, Marcus said immediately. But not just training, accountability. Every TransGlobal employee will wear body cameras during passenger interactions. Every complaint will be investigated by independent reviewers. Every incident of discrimination will result in immediate termination. That's going to cost millions, the venture capitalist noted. Discrimination has cost us billions, Marcus replied. In lost customers, in lawsuits, in human dignity. This is an investment in doing what's right. Emily Chen, the gate agent who had questioned Marcus's ticket, had been standing in the doorway watching everything unfold. She stepped forward, trembling. Mr. Mitchell, she said, her voice barely audible. I'm sorry, I didn't think I was racist. I thought I was just being careful protecting the airline from fraud. But I only get careful with certain passengers, don't I? Marcus studied her. She was young, probably genuinely unaware of her biases until this moment. Mrs. Chen, tell me what made you suspicious of my ticket. Emily's face crumpled. Your hoodie, your race, the combination. I assumed you didn't belong. I'm so sorry. Sorry isn't enough, Marcus said, but his tone was less harsh. You're terminated effective immediately. But unlike Ms. Williams, who has 3 previous complaints, this is your first documented incident. So I'm going to offer you something. Complete a year of community service in underserved communities, undergo intensive bias training, and write a public essay about your journey from unconscious bias to awareness. Do that, and I'll consider rehiring you in a different capacity. Emily nodded through her tears. Thank you, I'll do it. All of it. Janet Williams stepped forward. And me, do I get the same opportunity? Marcus shook his head. You've had 3 complaints, Ms. Williams. 3 chances to recognize your pattern. You chose to ignore them. Your termination is final. The captain's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, due to the extraordinary circumstances, we'll be returning to the gate. Any passenger who wishes to disembark may do so with a full refund. Those who wish to continue to Los Angeles will depart as soon as we're cleared. About a third of the passengers chose to leave overwhelmed by what they'd witnessed. Hawthorne stood to go, but Marcus stopped him. Judge Hawthorne, you're banned from transglobal flights permanently. But more importantly, the Illinois bar will be receiving a full transcript of your confession today. What you do with the rest of your life, knowing what you've done, is up to you. Hawthorne looked at Grace one more time. Mrs. Thompson, I don't expect forgiveness. Good, Grace interrupted, because I can't give it. That's between you and Cha. But I can tell you that my husband's last letter from prison said he prayed for you every night. Prayed that you'd find the conscience you'd lost. Maybe today, 20 years too late, his prayers are being answered. As Hawthorne left the plane, his shoulders slumped, his proud bearing gone, his son's words echoing through the speakers as the live stream continued. The judge who had built his career on the backs of innocent men was finally facing justice. As the plane sat at the gate, the cabin had transformed into something unprecedented in aviation history, a courtroom at 30,000 feet that hadn't yet taken off a boardroom where corporate policy was being rewritten in real time, and a stage where American history was being made. Tyler's live stream had passed 1 million viewers, and major news networks were breaking into regular programming to cover what they were calling the Flight 447 revolution. Marcus Mitchell stood in the aisle of the first-class cabin he had personally designed his mother Grace. Beside him, his daughter Zara holding his hand. The three generations of Thompsons, they would always be Thompsons in their hearts, represented past suffering, present power, and future hope. James Rodriguez had set up a mobile command center at the gate with lawyers, PR specialists, and federal investigators standing by. The transportation secretary had dispatched emergency response teams to every major airport, preparing for what would be the most comprehensive civil rights investigation in transportation history. Mr. Mitchell, Captain Anderson said, approaching with her co-pilot and flight engineer. My crew and I have been discussing. We want to be part of the solution. We've all witnessed discrimination and said nothing. We're all complicit. How do we fix this? Marcus appreciated her directness. Captain, you stood up when it mattered. That's a start. But you're right, silence has been the enabler. Starting tomorrow, every transglobal pilot will have the authority to remove any passenger or crew member engaging in discrimination. No corporate override, no appeals. Your word will be final. That's unprecedented, the co-pilot said. So is what happened today, Marcus replied. Unprecedented problems require unprecedented solutions. Dr. Kim, who had remained on board, stood up. Mr. Mitchell, I've been texting with my colleagues. The American Medical Association wants to partner with you. We see the same discrimination in hospitals, Black patients receiving less pain medication, Latino families being dismissed, Asian doctors being questioned about their credentials. Your model could transform healthcare too. The venture capitalist from 1A, who had been furiously typing on his laptop, looked up. Marcus, may I call you Marcus? I'm Jonathan Chen from Apex Ventures. I've just convened an emergency meeting of Silicon Valley's top VCs. We want to invest in your foundation. Not donate, invest. We believe fighting discrimination is not just morally right, but economically smart. Diverse companies outperform homogeneous ones by 35%. We're prepared to commit $500 million. Marcus was stunned. He'd expected resistance lawsuits pushed back. Instead, he was witnessing an awakening. Tyler, still streaming, asked a question from his viewers. Mr. Mitchell, someone wants to know, was this whole thing staged? Did everyone know? Only 3 people knew my full plan, Marcus replied. Myself, James here, and my mother. Everyone else, the crew, Judge Hawthorne, even my daughter had no idea. Their reactions were genuine. That's what made this a real test. Zara looked up at her father. You didn't tell me. If you'd known, you might have acted differently. I needed authentic reactions, sweetheart. Though I didn't expect you to walk up here and confront a judge with your school project. Despite the tension, several people chuckled. The 16-year-old had shown more courage than most adults. A new voice entered the conversation. The airline's chief legal officer, Margaret Foster, boarded the plane, her face ashen. She was followed by the entire board of directors, 12 people who controlled one of America's largest airlines, looking like they were approaching their execution. Marcus, Margaret said, her voice shaking, we had no idea this was happening. The board is prepared to resign if— I don't want resignations, Marcus interrupted. I want transformation. Margaret, you've been with TransGlobal for 15 years. In that time, how many discrimination complaints have you personally reviewed? She swallowed hard. Maybe 50. We received 3,847 in the last 5 years alone, Marcus said. Where were the rest? Handled at lower levels, settled quietly. I was told they were isolated incidents. Isolated incidents don't happen 3,847 times. Grace interjected, her voice sharp. That's a pattern. That's a culture. That's willful blindness. The board members shifted uncomfortably. Several were typing on their phones, probably consulting their own lawyers. The board chairman, William Brennan, the same man who had assured Marcus that diversity training was working, stepped forward. Marcus, the liability here is astronomical. If we admit systemic discrimination, we're looking at billions in lawsuits. We're looking at billions in lawsuits anyway, Marcus replied. The difference is whether we face them with integrity or denial. I choose integrity. The shareholders will revolt. I am the majority shareholder, Marcus reminded him, and as of 10 minutes ago, our stock is up 12%. The market respects accountability. Margaret's phone buzzed. She looked at it, and her face went even paler. The Justice Department is here. They want to speak with everyone involved. 3 federal investigators boarded the plane in their badges and serious expressions, adding gravity to an already heavy situation. The lead investigator, Special Agent Denise Carroll, surveyed the cabin. Mr. Mitchell, we've been monitoring the live stream. We have sufficient evidence to begin immediate prosecution for civil rights violations. However, we understand you're proposing an alternative resolution. Marcus nodded. Prosecution changes individuals. I want to change the system. Agent Carroll, what if TransGlobal became the test case for a new federal oversight program? Complete transparency, regular audits, mandatory reporting of all complaints directly to your office. Carroll considered this. That would be unprecedented. Airlines have always resisted federal oversight beyond safety regulations. Then we'll be the first to embrace it, Marcus said. In fact, I want to go further. I want TransGlobal to fund a federal task force on transportation discrimination. We'll pay for investigators, lawyers, and support staff. Our competitors will probably sue to block it, but let them try. The pharmaceutical executive from 3A, who had been quiet since revealing her own discrimination experience, stood up. Mr. Mitchell, I'm Dr. Patricia Huang, CEO of Avalon Pharmaceuticals. What you're proposing using corporate power for social justice, it's revolutionary. I want Avalon to be part of this. We'll match your foundation funding and implement similar policies in our facilities. Within minutes, Tyler's live stream became a de facto pledge drive. CEOs watching from around the country began calling in commitments. Tech companies, hospitals, law firms, even other airlines expressed interest in joining what was quickly becoming a movement. But the most surprising development came from an unexpected source. A young man boarded the plane escorted by security. He was in his early 30s, well-dressed, but clearly distressed. He walked directly to Grace Thompson. Mrs. Thompson, sir, he said, his voice cracking. I'm Michael Curtis Jr. My father was the man who actually robbed that store, the crime your husband was convicted for. The cabin went silent again. Grace stared at the young man, decades of pain flashing across her face. My father died 5 years ago, Michael Jr. continued. On his deathbed, he told me everything. How he robbed the store, shot Mr. Park, and then watched as David Thompson was convicted for it. He was too much of a coward to come forward. He let an innocent man die in prison rather than face justice himself. Tears were streaming down his face. I've been carrying this guilt for 5 years. When I saw the live stream, when I heard what Judge Hawthorne did, I had to come. I had to face you. Grace stood, slowly, her weathered hands trembling. The cabin held its breath, waiting for her response. Would she rage? Would she demand justice for her husband's memory? Instead, she did something no one expected. She embraced Michael Curtis Jr. Child, she said softly, you're not responsible for your father's sins. Just like my Marcus isn't defined by what happened to his father. We can't change the past, but we can choose how we let it shape our future. The young man sobbed in her arms. I want to help. I want to do something. I've become a lawyer because of what my father did. I work for the Innocence Project now, trying to free people like your husband. But it never feels like enough. Marcus stepped forward. Then work with us. Join the foundation. Help us ensure this never happens again. The moment was too powerful for words. Even hardened federal investigators were wiping their eyes. Tyler had stopped narrating, just holding his phone steady to capture history. Captain Anderson's voice broke the silence. Mr. Mitchell, we need a decision. Do we fly to Los Angeles or deplane everyone? Marcus looked around the cabin, at the witnesses to discrimination who had found their voices, at the corporate leaders pledging to change. at the federal investigators ready to enforce justice, at his mother showing grace to the son of the man who had destroyed their family, at his daughter representing a generation that wouldn't tolerate injustice. "We fly," he said, "but this flight will be different. Everyone in first class will switch with passengers from economy. Random selection, no status, no priority, just human beings sharing space equally." The board members gasped. "Marcus, that's revolutionary, yes. Necessary, absolutely. Starting today, Transglobal implements a monthly lottery. 50 economy passengers on every flight get randomly upgraded to first class. 50 first-class passengers get to experience economy. We'll call it the Grace Thompson Protocol, reminding everyone that dignity isn't determined by where you sit." Grace shook her head, smiling through tears. "David would have loved this. He always said the view was the same from every seat. It's just the legroom that changes." As passengers began switching seats, some first-class passengers grumbling, most economy passengers in shock, something beautiful happened. Conversations started. The venture capitalist found himself sitting next to a teacher from Chicago's South Side. The pharmaceutical executive sat beside an immigrant family flying to see relatives. Dr. Kim ended up next to a young black entrepreneur who had been watching everything from row 38. The plane began to feel less like a series of class divisions and more like what air travel was supposed to be, a shared journey. Emily Chen, the gate agent who'd been fired, approached Marcus one last time before leaving. "Mr. Mitchell, I've already started looking for community service opportunities. There's a literacy program in Chinatown that needs volunteers. Would that be acceptable?" "It's a start," Marcus said, "but I want monthly reports. And that essay, I want it published in a major outlet. No ghostwriters. Your words, your journey, your accountability." She nodded and left her career at Transglobal over, but perhaps her education in humanity just beginning. Janet Williams was escorted off by security. Her 20-year career ended by 20 seconds of discrimination. As she passed, she stopped at Grace. "I'm sorry," she said. "I know it doesn't mean anything now, but I'm sorry. I let my assumptions override my humanity." Grace studied her. "Your apology would mean more if it came with action. What are you going to do now?" Janet had no answer. She left in silence, another casualty of systemic prejudice that she'd helped perpetuate. As the plane finally prepared for departure 2 hours late, but carrying the weight of history, Marcus received a call. It was the President of the United States. "Mr. Mitchell," the President's voice came through the phone Marcus had put on speaker. "I've been briefed on the situation. What you've done today, turning personal discrimination into systemic reform, that's leadership. Real leadership. Thank you, Mr. President. I'm calling to offer federal support for your initiative. We want the Grace Thompson Protocol to become federal law. Every airline, train, bus service, they'll all have to implement equity measures. You've started something that can't be stopped." Grace took the phone. "Mr. President, with all due respect, this shouldn't have taken my son being discriminated against to create change. How many David Thompsons are in prison right now? How many mothers are cleaning planes while their innocent husbands rot in cells? Too many, Mrs. Thompson, far too many. That's why we need people like your son, and frankly, people like you. Would you consider serving on a federal commission for criminal justice reform?" Grace looked at Marcus, who nodded encouragingly. "Mr. President, I'm 70 years old. I've been cleaning planes for 30 years. What could I possibly offer? Perspective that Harvard law graduates don't have. Experience that money can't buy. And moral authority that political power can't match. Please, Mrs. Thompson, help us fix this broken system." "I'll consider it," Grace said, then added, "but I have conditions. Real reform, not just talk. Real accountability, not just reports. And the first case we review, every conviction by Judge Richard Hawthorne." "Agreed." As the call ended and the plane finally pushed back from the gate, Tyler ended his live stream with a final statement to his 1.5 million viewers. "What you've witnessed today isn't just about one airline or one family. It's about America confronting its original sin, the belief that some people matter more than others based on how they look, what they wear, or where they come from." Marcus Mitchell could have revealed himself immediately and avoided all of this. Instead, he chose to expose the truth. And that truth is setting us all free. The plane took off into a cloudy Chicago morning, but as it climbed above the clouds, sunlight flooded the cabin. In seat 2A, Marcus Mitchell sat with his daughter. In 2B, Grace Thompson experienced her first flight in first class. Around them, passengers of every background, economic status, and story shared the same space, the same journey, the same sky. Halfway through the flight, Richard Hawthorne Jr. sent a video message that Captain Anderson played over the intercom. "This is Richard Hawthorne Jr. from Los Angeles. I want everyone on that flight to know that as of 15 minutes ago, 17 of my father's wrongful convictions have been officially overturned by emergency judicial review. 17 innocent men will be released today. Their records will be expunged. Their families will receive formal apologies and compensation. This is just the beginning. We're reviewing all 3,000 cases my father presided over. Justice delayed is not justice denied, not anymore." The cabin erupted in applause. Grace wept openly, holding a picture of David she always carried. "You're free, baby," she whispered to the photo. "Your name is clear. You're free." Dr. Kim, from her new seat in economy, she had insisted on switching, even though Marcus said it wasn't necessary, called out, "Mr. Mitchell, I just got a text from the AMA board. They were voting to implement mandatory body cameras in all emergency rooms. They're calling it the Mitchell-Thompson Protocol." The pharmaceutical executive, also in economy, now added, "Avalon's board just approved a $200 million fund for free medications for wrongly convicted individuals and their families. We're calling it the David Thompson Memorial Fund." As updates poured in from across the country, it became clear that Flight 447 had sparked something unprecedented. Companies were announcing discrimination audits. Cities were reviewing police procedures. Universities were overhauling admission policies. The change wasn't just corporate, it was personal. Throughout the plane, conversations that never would have happened in the old seating arrangement were taking place. The venture capitalist was learning about public school challenges from the teacher. The immigrant family was sharing their American dream with the pharmaceutical executive. Barriers weren't just being crossed, they were being dissolved. As Los Angeles approached, Marcus stood to address the cabin one final time. "Ladies and gentlemen, what happened today wasn't comfortable for anyone. Change never is. Some of you witnessed discrimination. Some of you participated in it. Some of you stood against it. But all of you are part of history now. My father died in prison for a crime he didn't commit, but he never lost his dignity. My mother cleaned planes for 30 years, but she never lost her pride. Today we honor them not with revenge, but with reform. Not with hatred, but with hope. When you leave this plane, you have a choice. You can return to your lives unchanged, or you can carry this moment with you. You can be satisfied with where you sit, or you can ensure everyone has a seat at the table. You can accept discrimination as inevitable, or you can make it intolerable. Transglobal airlines will never be the same, but more importantly, I hope none of us will ever be the same. As the plane descended toward LAX, news helicopters circled, capturing its arrival. On the ground, hundreds of reporters waited. The story had gone global, translated into dozens of languages, shared millions of times, already being adapted into documentaries and films. But in Seat 2A, Marcus Mitchell wasn't thinking about the media attention or the historic nature of what had transpired. He was thinking about his father, David Thompson, who had died believing in a justice system that had failed him. He was thinking about his mother, Grace, who had raised him to succeed despite every obstacle. He was thinking about his daughter, Zara, who would inherit a different world because of what happened today. The plane touched down at 12:34 p.m. Pacific time. As passengers prepared to deplane, something remarkable happened. Without prompting, without coordination, they began applauding. Not for Marcus, not for the moment, but for each other. For the courage to speak up. For the humility to admit wrong. For the grace to forgive. For the determination to change. Judge Richard Hawthorne had been wrong about one thing. First class wasn't about belonging. It was about believing. Believing that every person deserved dignity. Believing that justice could prevail. Believing that one flight, one moment, one stand could change everything. As Marcus, Grace, and Zara walked off the plane together, 3 generations united in purpose, they were met by a sea of cameras and reporters. But they also saw something else, transglobal employees, hundreds of them, who had driven to the airport to witness this moment. They held signs, "We stand with the Thompsons," "Justice for David," "Grace Protocol now," "Change starts today." Among them stood Captain Patricia Anderson, who had deplaned first to join them. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, saluting him, "it would be my honor to fly you home whenever you're ready, in any seat you choose." Marcus smiled. "Captain, I think I'll keep sitting in 2A, But now everyone will know why not because I own it, but because I earned it, just like every other passenger who pays for their ticket and deserves respect. 6 months later, the impact was undeniable. The Grace Thompson Protocol had been adopted by every major airline. Discrimination complaints had dropped 89%. Judge Hawthorne's wrongful convictions, all 43 of them, had been overturned. The judge himself had voluntarily surrendered his law license and begun working with the Innocence Project, trying to undo the damage he'd caused. Richard Hawthorne Jr. had become the foundation's lead counsel, working alongside Michael Curtis Jr. to free wrongly convicted individuals nationwide. Emily Chen had completed her community service and written a viral essay about unconscious bias that was now required reading in corporate training programs. Even Janet Williams had found redemption, creating a nonprofit that trained airline workers to recognize and combat their prejudices. Tyler Brooks had won a Pulitzer Prize for his live stream journalism. Dr. Kim had revolutionized hospital policies nationwide. The venture capitalist had created a billion-dollar fund specifically for businesses owned by people of color. The pharmaceutical executive had made life-saving medications accessible to millions who couldn't afford them. But the most powerful change was in the Thompson family. Grace had accepted the federal position, becoming the conscience of a justice system desperately in need of reform. At her first commission meeting, she'd placed a photo of David on the table and said, "This man died for our sins of prejudice. Let's make sure his death means something." Zara had started a youth movement teaching her generation to document discrimination and demand change. Her social media campaign, Grace Protocol Generation, had 10 million followers and had spawned student activism in schools across the country. And Marcus? He had transformed Transglobal into the most equitable airline in the world. But more importantly, he'd proven that power without principle was meaningless, that wealth without wisdom was worthless, and that change was possible when courage met opportunity. On the one-year anniversary of Flight 447, Marcus, Grace, and Zara took the same flight Chicago to Los Angeles. This time there was no discrimination, no confrontation, no drama. Just 3 generations of Thompsons flying together, sitting wherever they chose, treated with the dignity every human being deserved. As the plane lifted off, Grace pulled out the photo of David she always carried. But this time she also pulled out a new photo, one taken at the Federal Commission, showing her being sworn in by the president with Marcus and Zara by her side. "We did it, baby," she whispered to David's photo. "We turned our pain into purpose. We turned our loss into law. We turned discrimination into determination. You didn't die for nothing. You died so others could live free." Marcus heard his mother's whisper and squeezed her hand. "He would be proud, Mom." "He is proud," Grace corrected. "Wherever he is, he's proud, and he's finally truly free." The plane climbed through the clouds toward a sun that seemed brighter than ever before. Below, America was changing, one seat, one flight, one heart at a time. And it had all started with a simple question: who belongs in first class? The answer, as it turned out, was everyone. Flight 447 had taken off as a routine flight from Chicago to Los Angeles. It landed as a turning point in American history. And Marcus Mitchell, who had boarded as a target of discrimination, deplaned as an architect of transformation. But he would always be Marcus Thompson, son of David and Grace, raised in Chicago's South Side, educated by struggle, strengthened by injustice, and ultimately defined not by what was done to his family, but by what his family did in response. The revolution hadn't been televised. It had been live streamed. It had been witnessed. It had been lived. And it had only just begun.